Being every bit as good about getting here on time as you used to be getting to class when you were here in the program. I want to mention that there's a gentleman in the back who's videotaping this. Several people who can't be here expressed the hope that we would do that. I want to assure you that anything that is said in Carroll Hall stays in Carroll Hall unless we have your permission to use it otherwise. So let's move on. Several people in the audience are either current or former members of either the faculty or staff. Let me just invite them to stand so we can greet them. We may outnumber the alumni. There's one very special person here who is a graduate of the MBA program, class of 1960. If you do the math, that is Bob Hedden's 55th reunion, and he served many years on the faculty. Where's Bob? There he is. Bob? One of the things that we're going to do this morning is cover a bit of history. One of the reasons for coming to Carroll Hall was that any of you who came through the program and graduated 1995 or earlier, you knew Carroll Hall, and you may not feel particularly attached to the McCall building and maybe not to the name Kenan Flagler. If you came through the program 2000 or later, you know the McCall building, and you don't know Carroll Hall. And we were already the Kenan Flagler Business School by that time. So part of what we hope to do here is sort of pull a little history together so that you feel maybe a bit more of connection to that history. So we have what I have called a milestones video to show you very briefly. When we were getting ready to do this, we thought you're going to hear the voice of Raleigh Tillman and see him doing the narrative. When we thought Raleigh wasn't going to be here, we were particularly determined to use this because we wanted you not only to see the video, but to hear it explained with Raleigh's voice. Raleigh is here, I'm very glad to say, and we're glad to have him here, and glad to have him have worked on this because this outtake is a segment of a video that we use in orienting incoming MBA students every year now. So you're about to get reoriented. Cue the video.
In 1919, it was decided to start a School of Commerce, spun out of the Department of Economics. And the president asked one of the economics professors, a man named Dudley Carroll, to organize a School of Commerce. Now, it is true that most entrepreneurial ventures start in the basement or the garage. Ours didn't. Ours started in the attic of the Alumni building. And the reason is that there was no central air conditioning, and that was the least attractive place. So they stuck the new venture up on the 4th floor of the Alumni building and began to offer a degree of Bachelor of Science of Commerce. We outgrew that building in 3 years. The first undergraduate degree was issued in 1921, and by 1922, we had to move to another building for our own account. By then, it was the second largest major on the campus. The idea worked. We stayed in that building for about 7 years, and outgrew that and moved closer to the main library. If you're keeping mental track and you know the campus, we're almost to the bell tower. In 1953, we moved to Carroll Hall and stayed there until 1997, adding on to it. And some wonderful things happened. In 1952, we began an MBA program. In 1985, the Masters of Accounting program was created. In 1986, the Executive MBA was created, and things really took off from there. We have evening programs, we have weekend programs, we have global programs. In 2010, we seized the chance to offer a UNC business education anywhere around the world and created the online MBA at UNC program. We will have interstellar programs when the time is appropriate. Okay, the executive program started in 1954, our first venture in training corporate people while they still held their jobs. It took off pretty well. The living proof of that is the Rizzo Center, with our additions going on. All of that devoted to executive education. And certainly our MBA programs for the working professionals are part of that. The Kenan Institute of Private Enterprise was founded in 1985 to bring the business and the academic and the government together to solve problems of mutual need and to promote a better understanding. The Kenan Center opened in 1987 to house the Institute of Private Enterprise, and on its 5th floor, the William R. Kenan Trust and the William R. Kenan Jr. Fund, two very important funding agencies. The name was changed to the Kenan Flagler Business School in 1991 after the Kenan Center was opened and the Kenan Institute had taken off.
Wally, thank you for that. There's one milestone, I guess I didn't prepare for that. There's one milestone in the school's history that I think was not captured there. That was the formation of an organization called the Business Foundation in the 1940s, and I think it was about 1942, Raleigh. It was literally because of the formation of that foundation, a group of businessmen around the state, that later decided that the state needed an MBA program at the university in Chapel Hill. And that led to the later creation of the MBA program, and I think it was dated at starting in 1952 as a one-year program. So let's move ahead. You captured from that video the fact that the Department of Commerce was created in 1919. That means we're approaching the 100th year anniversary of what is now the business school. So stay tuned for what I'm sure will be a suitable celebration and recognition of that milestone. So, moving on. A 50th reunion is something that I think of as a special milestone. I confess that my wife and I are not only beyond our 50th, but also our 55th reunion at the undergraduate institution that we share. But this year, we expect several people back from the class of the MBA class of 1965 here for their 50th reunion. I know I've seen at least two of those folks. Would those folks who were here, and another one, would you all stand so we can welcome you? Class of 1965. Now, I asked Richard McAnally, a member of this class, and subsequently a member of our finance faculty for many years, to make some brief remarks on behalf of the class. When he replied, his words were something to the effect that, happy to do so would be putting it too strongly, but I'm willing. Now, if there were ever a classical Richard McAnally quote, that is. But Richard has undertaken an unusual assignment. He reached out to the members of his MBA class to invite them to send in short bios. And he got a remarkable 75% response from the living members of that class. And I can tell you the results make very interesting reading. But Richard and we have promised promised the people who submitted those bios that nothing on those pages would be turned over to our development staff. But, and I'll mention one other thing about 50th reunions. Some of you who perhaps are closer to Chapel Hill may know that a few years ago the university started the practice of inviting the 50-year reunion people to march at the front of the commencement procession every year, which I think is almost as spectacular a thing to see as watching all those undergraduates in blue robes flow down into Kenan Stadium for commencement. But Richard, the floor is yours. Whatever you'd like to say.
I heard the part, I think I can do this without I think I heard the part about brief, Jack, and I'll keep it in mind. First of all, I do want to express my appreciation to Jack for all the things he's done for the business school and the university over the years. He's been called out on many, many occasions, probably too many, like this one, to do things that need to be done. As Jack said, I was in the MBA class of 1965. Things were very different in those days. Not only was there not a McCall building, there wasn't even a new Carroll Hall. We operated in this building, and it certainly didn't look like this. And we took some classes in Haynes Hall and Gardner Hall, and we had a little MBA lounge over in the basement of Gardner Haynes, which is how the hall this is. There were a grand total of 58 of us in the class. I'm happy to say that 51 of us, as best we can tell, still walking on the face of the earth. We had ours was a one-year program, and it was the last year for the one-year program. There will not be a 50th year 1966 reunion next year because there's no 1966 class. We were very well taught. Whit Gilboyne in finance comes to mind, Harold Langendorfer in accounting, Jerry Garrick, who ran the program and also taught policy. I think Lloyd George taught some policy courses, and particularly Raleigh Tillman and Nick Levy. Fortunately, are still with us today. We had a great group. Everybody was very close, and we've done very well. Jack alluded to the collection of what I've done the last 50 years, bio sketches. This is something I hope 50-year classes will continue in the future. I think it was quite successful. And it goes on, but I'll tell you that two of my classmates started substantial publicly held companies. Many of them started very successful private companies. Everybody seemed to have good careers. We had, given the times, we had a number of people who went with IBM. I'm particularly happy to say, had a number of people who went into money management. That's also always been a strength of this business school. We had, the guy that comes to mind went into the Episcopal ministry. Everybody didn't stick with business. And if anybody's in prison, they didn't send them down. I would make one other observation, and I may be somewhat biased having been on the faculty for many years, but those of us who are alumni did what everybody should aspire to do. We went to a program that over the years has increased in quality and increased in reputation. Any number of alumni have told me probably couldn't get in today if were forced to do so. As I'm sure you know, this business school is routinely ranked in the top 20 in the country, frequently in the top 10. It must be one of the top 2 or 3 state-supported business schools in the United States. And there's one other thing I want to mention, and here I'll stop. While doing this faculty has been able to maintain an academic tradition, developing and contributing to the practice of business management. And there are other business schools. I think of a state school about 120 miles north of here. I can't remember the name, but has a great reputation, but they've done nothing to add to the body of knowledge. So it's a great institution. You should be proud to have degrees from it and/or be on the faculty. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. It's good to see you back in Chapel Hill. Now I think we have a picture for you that I'm going to explain. Richard mentioned that the class of '65 was the last year in the one-year program. This is a graduation picture of the class of 1968. Back there in the back row, standing tall, is Smedes York from Raleigh, who was an undergraduate at NC State, played basketball there. Not a lot, but he played basketball. Went on to a very successful career in the family firm in Raleigh, but he was the instigator in this class of a reunion that occurred a year ago. It wasn't their 50th reunion, it was only the first time they'd ever had a reunion, and Smedes wanted to get them all together. But we wanted to show you this picture, number one, to show you the size of the class. Not very large. I think Smedes told me that the class was about 48 people, and there were maybe all but a couple of them in this picture. But another thing that you will notice is that by this time, we hadn't yet gotten very good at recruiting women or minorities. That changed as we moved along. We're going to kind of run through the classes here very quickly. I want to comment on the class of 1970. We didn't have anybody signed up to return. From that class? Is anybody here from that class, a late emerging reunion? Well, I want to comment on 1970. In 1970, the Vietnam War was not only still going on, it was a long way from reaching its conclusion. The spring of 1970 was the time of the Kent State shootings. Tensions were high on university campuses at that time. I remember attending a conference at the University of Wisconsin that spring where, because of the location we were scheduled to meet, they moved us off campus because they were afraid that a demonstration was going to occur. Things were sufficiently unsettled here that the university canceled spring final exams, and people got whatever grade they had in the course to that point, and we moved on to commencement. I'll tell you one other story that, this is something that I personally observed, not here, but while I was in graduate school in the 60s. I took a course at Cornell from someone in the math department who was part of, at that time, a very famous two-person collaboration in research in mathematics. But those two individuals ended up on different sides of the opinion on the Vietnam War, and that difference split that collaboration. They never wrote another paper together after that, and I've always considered that to be a loss in the sense of, I think of what those two men could have done in their research if they had been able to manage to continue to collaborate. I hope it's not the case that recollections of those things are why we don't have anybody from 1970 back, but in my mind, it's one of those things that it's useful to reflect back on, to think about how those events influenced what we were doing at the university at the time. So let's move ahead to the class of 1975. In the middle 70s, I think of as a time when some really significant things began to happen with the MBA program. How many people do we have here from the class of 75 this morning? welcome back. Yeah, good for you, Cal.
I'm a member of that class.
Well, and I'm about to turn the podium over to you, so to speak, but I want to introduce it in a way. One of the things that was happening in the 70s was that we were beginning to think that if we simply took the students that sort of came to us by their own initiative, we probably weren't going to build the MBA program to be what we wanted it to be. And at that time, this will seem strange to you, but our admissions process was still controlled by the graduate school over in South Building. We essentially made two sets of decisions. Those applications would come through us and we would say yes, yes, no, yes, yes. And then we would send those things to the graduate school and they would say yes, maybe, whatever. I mean, we did not control that. Similarly, we did not control, we were not able to have our own placement effort separate from the placement activities of the university. But Cal Atwood was, at least in my mind, the first person on the staff of the business school. We weren't yet Kenan Flagler at that point. But Cal was the person who undertook to do some active recruiting of students for the MBA program and to work on the other side of things on placement. Cal left the business school to go on to greater glory later in the 70s. But Cal, I invite you to talk a bit about your experiences here in those days.
I do need a mic at the age of 91. I'll bet everybody here a dollar that I'm the oldest person here. I was born in 1924. But the wonderful thing about being here, and I came in 71, left in 79, the wonderful thing about being here is that the faculty and the administration and the students work together, and the policies developed, I thought, a lot by the faculty just seemed to work beautifully in terms of getting us outreach into the world. And in admissions, we were looking for older students, and that was a delight for me as an old Marine to go hunting for people 24, 25, 27, 28, and I had a special place in my heart for veterans, and we found some in various places, and they substanced the classes. And the stronger we grew and the better our classes were, the easier it was to attract more people of that caliber and with a little bit more age. But the 25, 26, 27-year-old student who had been in the service or who had worked in the corporate world or family business, whatever, they were able to bring so much to the classes. I think we just grew stronger and stronger. And it's fascinating to me that the faculty moved right into administration, in and out, wherever they wanted to, except for Jack. And we who were trying to do placement, admissions, alumni development, there weren't many resources to be deployed. Maybe there weren't any resources to be deployed. So the faculty interjected itself into administration in a very substantive way, and I think everybody began to realize that placement had huge ramifications for alumni, for admissions, and of course for development. And everyone who was there at that time, and especially the faculty members and people like Jay Klopmaker and C.L. Kendall, Dr. Pringle, Dr. Levin, and Jack, understood the ramifications and the huge bridging of placement, admissions, alumni, and development. And it all intertwined inextricably and was a beautiful thing to watch develop. And I was glad I was on that ground floor, and I I loved working here. It was the best job I ever had. And I had a lot of jobs. I got fired regularly from wherever it was that I happened to be. I was in another school, and I won't name it, where I didn't think the faculty cared an awful lot about the students. And it was so impressive to me to work with faculty members who really cared when somebody was in trouble. Boy, and that was the thing, as far as I was concerned, I was in love with the students. And faculty members who were disinterested at that other school turned me off gigantically. And so it was wonderful here to have faculty members who really cared. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Pat. Another important thing that occurred in the 70s, in my judgment, is the fact that we affiliated with an organization called the Consortium for Graduate Study in Management. This was a group of, as I remember at that time, 7 institutions that pooled resources with the express purpose of identifying minority individuals interested in studying in MBA programs. And we had a complicated algorithm for figuring out how that pool got allocated across the 7 participating institutions. But that was, I mean, as my recollection is in 1973, I think that's the first year I taught in the MBA program. I think we had 2 minority students in the MBA program total that year. And affiliating with the consortium helped get us access to a larger and better pool of minority candidates. And that time, minority meant primarily African American students. But that was another significant commitment of the time. In my mind, there's another thing that took place perhaps gradually over the years in the middle 70s. I'm not going to name it. I'm going to let John Kringle talk about it in the way he wants to talk about it. But John, I'll turn the floor over to you.
I think I'll use the mic if,
It's on the way to you.
all right. When we came a 2-year program, thank you. We came a 2-year program, is it on? Is that on? We came a 2-year program in 1968 or so, and it was, I think, then probably called the MBA program. But when you think about what the word program means, it means that the program is more than just a collection of courses. It's got to be, there's got to be a factor there of integration. Well, in the early 70s, we still had just a collection of 2 years worth of courses. So the program was being run by a committee of the most senior people in the school. I mean, these were really big. This was Jack Bierman, and Dick Levin, and Jerry Barrett, and Bob Hedden, and C.L. Kendall, and Harold Langendorfer, and I'm Jack Slumpmaker, and I don't know who I'm leaving out. But they decided to pull the whole first year apart and resequence the courses. So the finance course, instead of being a 1 semester long course, would split I don't remember what I was involved in. I think it was done before I was really heavily involved. The first year became 4 modules, each one about 7 weeks long. And the finance course was taught twice a week for 7 weeks in module 1, and then we did all in module 2, and then again in module 3. So it didn't look anything like the old 1 semester long courses. And when this was done, I think it was concluded that there was still a piece missing. We had resequenced, but we hadn't really integrated the material. So the committee of elders decided that they would called the core course coordinators peel back another layer of the onion and reach down into the courses themselves and start moving stuff around. Well, I think the committee of elders decided that this was getting dangerous and it might be a real debacle. So they looked around for somebody to chair it, and they picked this guy Pringle, who was fairly new, and it was, they thought that if this craters, it'll be his ass. So I was made the chairman, and what we did, we started out by having the whole first year faculty meet once a week, and we laid out the total content of the first year in a great big matrix, week by week, everything that was going on in every course. And we actually started asking instructors to make changes in what they were doing. And because we wanted to make darn sure that by the time somebody was teaching marketing in Module 3, that the necessary tools and analytical techniques, and the students had already been exposed to that somewhere along the line. And that was not true at that point. So we set off on this, and starting when you start telling instructors what to do in their own courses, this is not done. And it reminds me of a story about the first televised basketball game at UNC when Frank McGuire was the coach. And the story, as I heard it, from a wonderful fellow named Roy Holston, who some of you may remember. Roy said that CBS, or whoever it was, called the two coaches in and said, we want to explain to you fellas how this is going to work. And the CBS man said to Coach McGuire, now Coach, when we call the first TV timeout, here's what's going to happen. And McGuire said, call timeout? What are you talking about? I call the timeouts for our team. This guy looked at McGuire and said, not anymore. Well, it wasn't quite that way with us, but we were trying to ask instructors to please let's change this around so that this happens and that happens. So by the time we got done, we really had, I think, changed the character of the first year program. And the whole idea was to make this an experience where, somewhat, Cal would mention the Marine Corps. I think we wanted it to be a really intense experience that engenders in the students a feeling of we're all in this together. Not that we're competing with one another. We're in this together and we're collaborating with one another. Because the last thing you want among MBA students is a feeling of competition between students. You want a collaborative feeling. So we're all in this together, and we wanted it to be so intense that you would remember the first case on the first day. And some people actually do. Somebody was telling me that last night. But then I think that effort, we hope, succeeded. And by the 75 or 76, we actually had a program that we could say had integrated the material, and that we were paying attention, at least in equal parts, to both content and process. So with that, Jack, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you.
Here's our mic man.
I can assure you that core course coordinating committee was, number one, a lot of work, but a lot of good came of it. But the other thing I'll say of it is that's as close to communism as we ever got. I'll tell you one other story about John Pringle. I've heard him say this in a number of ways, but it also connects to what we were about in that period of time. By the middle 1970s, if you were a young faculty member in the business school, if you were smart at all, you figured out that you weren't going to get promoted if you didn't teach successfully in the MBA program. And that was the beginning and the re-emphasis of a commitment to teaching, particularly in the MBA program, but it pervades the school. It did then, it does now. But the story about John Pringle goes this way. His version of it goes, I love to teach. I do that for free. But if you insist that I grade papers, I insist that you pay me. Now, we have several people here from the class of 75. Jim, Marshall, would any of you folks like to make a comment?
Well, Jack, a couple of things come to mind for me. One was, as we thought about this gathering and exchanged recollections, several of us figured the only reason we got in was because Cal Atwood saw something in us that only our mother saw. We also remember in the second year playing basketball on Friday mornings. Some of us had to go, well, some of our classmates were off getting jobs, but the rest of us were playing basketball. And the guy that was the hardest to guard was the guy that I called our intermittent dean, Jack Evans. And he was also in better shape than the rest of us.
You tell it better than it was, but thank you.
Well, I can't remember whether you could go to your right or left. But
Yes.
We also remembered the state of technology at the school, and there was a small room upstairs that had two what we call clunkers in it, and they were connected to TUC, I believe it was called, Triangle University Computation Center, and that was the extent of our IT capabilities. And the thing I also remember is that my tuition bill for the last semester I was here was $300. One final thing, I noted that in our class, I think there were 112 of us, we had 12 women, so we improved on that 68 class you saw. And I think Cal Atwood had a lot to do with that too.
Well, that basketball game following a late night at Clarence Bar and Grill on Thursday. But we had a class that enjoyed socializing together as well as studying and working together. And I think being a liberal arts undergraduate, the thing that I enjoyed about our program was the work-study groups, except in that one instance where Jim Ewell and I made a key punch error and gave away $3 million in dividends from the company and it was losing money. And Lennon said something to the effect, it just shows that no matter how bad your company is, you can't improve it by giving away dividends. It was a great experience, and like all of us, we're so endeared to Cal Atwood, and I agree with Jim. I'm sure that I would not have gotten in had it not been for Cal.
I'll say one more thing about that period in the mid-70s. A wonderful gentleman by the name of Maurice Lee was dean of the school from 1956 to 1976. Among other things, he was willing to turn over that management of the MBA curriculum to a group of faculty in the way that he did. And I think we benefited enormously from that. In addition to that, any of you who were here during that period probably had the opportunity to take a course on macroeconomic policy, or macroeconomics at least, from Maurice Lee. And if you had an opportunity to take that course from him, or to take its successive course from Jim Smith, in my opinion, you got the opportunity to hear from two of the most lucid expositors of economic policy that I've ever experienced in my life. But Maurice Lee, I think, did the MBA program a great favor by permitting us to take charge of it the way we did. Let's move on. Class of 1980. Is Bob Jones here? There he is. I invited you to make a few comments. Do you want to talk a little bit about the class of 1980? And, you know, anything you say is subject to rebuttal from your classmates.
Thanks, Ed. It strikes me, after listening to some of the preceding speakers, that we were a bit of a transition class at UNC. Starting with John Pringle's commentary about changing the curriculum to the most difficult thing he would face on the first day. We walk into Dick Levin's class, and he started with Air-Cooled Industries. We all still remember the name of the test, if you will, of the case that we were studying, and he proceeded to just kill us on day one of our first couple of weeks at UNC. And it was a real eye-opener for us because Cal's efforts had started to succeed. We had a more diverse class. We had a more diverse class both from gender and also from age, but we were still, I think, a bit of a motley crew, I'd have to say. If you looked at our class and said, describe your class as part of a movie cast, I would say Mad Max. We had the distinguishing characteristic in our class that we had vehicles, and we could get to UNC and come to class. My colleague Wayne Gibbs arrived in a VW camper, which he lived in for about a week before he found housing at UNC. Jerry Ruddle came on a motorcycle. I mean, we literally just sort of showed up. Jim Bailey, who's sitting right down the way, had a Ford Pinto. For those of you who don't remember what a Ford Pinto was, this was a very, very odd vehicle. And we took that vehicle skiing at spring break to Vermont. So we were a bit of just a risk-taking sort of odd group, but we came together well, and we had, I think, a fantastic experience and benefited from a lot of the people who came before, changed the curriculum and things like that. Two things that were interesting about our year, I think. As we got started with our finance professors and our courses, the Wall Street Journal advertised a new product right around that time called a money market fund. And Dreyfus would have ads in the Wall Street Journal about their money market funds. And we didn't know what a money market fund was, but they advertised rates of return on liquid assets of roughly 16 to 18%. And we thought, well, that's pretty good. And we could go down to the student aid center and borrow money at 6%, which I think is still the rate for federal loans or whatever. So a bunch of us walked down to the student aid center, borrowed money at 6%, and invested in the Dreyfus Money Market Fund at 16%. And you will recall that the federal loans don't have to be paid off for 10 years after you get them. So we had a nice little arbitrage going right out of the chute in MBA school. So we were a motley crew, but we kind of got it a little bit as we got going. And the only other thing I would say about our class, we had a bunch of characters, no question. We started the MBA Follies, and there aren't that many people from the subsequent classes, but you will recall that our class started the Follies in 1980, and I'm told, Matt, I think you told me, that the MBA Follies are still going. And we're Thursday night maybe at the Varsity Theater, so I hope some of you went to see it. Unfortunately, we don't have today either of our lead players. We had Saturday Night Live was a new thing, and we had, I guess it Duffy played who, Dan Aykroyd or Chevy Chase, one or the other, and Nancy Corman, who was here last night, played Jane. I won't go on with, you know, the rest of the term of who Nancy played. So we had a great time with our Follies. We still get together a lot. There's probably 20 of us here now, and there were probably 35 of us here last night at the reunion. So from all of our class, I will tell you the opportunity we got at Carolina, the professors we had at Carolina, the launching pad for our careers that we got here are much appreciated and are things that have enabled us to lead really fantastic, interesting, and enjoyable lives. So from the standpoint of the class of 1980, I would say mission accomplished.
I hope you folks will take this the right way. There are way too many of you from the class of 1980 here for us to pass the mic all the way along. I hope you will, you will, as the saying goes, yield the remainder of your time to Senator Jones. Let's move on to the class of 1985. Is Roger McCall here? Roger, good. Would you like to comment on the mic is working its way to you, Roger?
Thanks, Jack. My first memory on my first day was walking into your class at 7:30 in the morning.
Was I there?
You were. Not all our classmates were. In fact, one of them came in about 15 minutes late, stomped in his flip-flops, threw his books down to the front desk, and proceeded to do that every single class for about the next month until somebody had to talk with him. But we had a great class, and the things that I, like most of you, probably remember about here are the people. With all due respect, not the statistics and not the 4 Ps and not dates, but the people who got me here. Mike Miles and Jay Klopmaker used to teach a course called Business for Engineers at Westinghouse. They came up and tried to teach some of us engineers a little bit about business, and were successful enough that I got interested in coming somewhere for a business degree. And Jay said, well, come on down here, take a look at Carolina. And I did, and I've never regretted it. My classmates, one of them, who I've subsequently forgiven, introduced me to my first wife. He's here somewhere. I don't know if he's made it through here yet today. One of my classmates suggested, hey, let's go hear this guy talk about consulting, who is also an alumni. I went and I was with that gentleman's firm for 21 years. After I left that firm, that same classmate said, hey, let's have lunch. She said, I want to get back into consulting, and I'd really like a job where I make a lot of money and work about 36 hours a week and never have to travel. I said, wow, that sounds really good. When that comes along, I'll be sure to give you a call. Well, 2 weeks later, I had more projects than I could handle, and one of them was all in Charlotte where she lived, and it was perfect, and it resulted in a several-year collaboration. So, a lot of my friends to this day are people from that first year, and Dr. Pringle, thanks for that explanation. We always wondered why you were doing to us what you did, but it was a great first year. You know, whether it was intended or not, the idea of everyone taking their test at the same time on a Friday resulted in a lot of good times at the upper deck afterward. He's not here, and a lot of other places where, you know, after that exam, which was almost every Friday, you could go out and have a really good time with your classmates. And so those are the memories that I have, and we'll continue to cherish. We don't have a lot of folks here from our class this year, but I'm looking forward to 5 years from now making a greater effort to get people. So thanks.
Thanks, Roger. In the class of 1990, we've got Leo Horry and maybe others, but Leo, the floor is yours.
I'd like to object in advance.
Which was a typical approach in every class. Last night, I saw Jack and he asked me if I would say a couple words, and I was like, well, what should I say? And he said, well, you just need to come up with it. And sitting here, kind of listening to everybody, kind of 3 things come to mind. Number 1 is that I think, you know, I'm just a beneficiary. I wasn't making a contribution, I wasn't a professor here, but I think a big thank you goes out to all the professors and administrators who have spoken today. Our class, I was a great beneficiary of the wisdom that they bestowed, and that thank you is genuine and heartfelt. The second thing that I have always felt strongly about with respect to Carolina is the community that's here. And, you know, last night, I don't know how many class of 90 people were here. There are probably 35 or 40 of the class of 90. And when I was here, it was pretty clear that the community was unique. We felt like we had a really unique class and a really unique community that had come together, and many of us have stayed in contact. But I think there's a broader community that's offered through Carolina, and in the years since I've left, I've been the beneficiary of that community as well. And whether you're formally tied or informally tied, it's a community that you can always reach back to. And it's a really unique aspect of Carolina that I think we all know, but I'm not sure we all appreciate it to the degree that it exists. When I talk to other business colleagues, they don't espouse the same affection for the school that they went to. They don't espouse the same affection for the people that they met, and I think that's really, really neat. The third thing that I think is really, really, really important is that we all pay it forward, and that we really think about paying it forward in order to perpetuate the community that's been developed. So whether it's helping Sherry and Allison when they call from an admissions perspective, or responding to a student or a recently graduated student from a mentoring or helping them to find a job, or just figuring out a way to support Adam and his team with the financial resources that we've been beneficiaries of, I think that we have a responsibility to pay it forward. And you know, when I think about the class of 90, I think we've done a good job that way. When I hear about the other classes, they've done a good job. And I think that that's what we need to carry forward for the students that come through in the future. So with that, I'll turn it back to Jack.
Thank you, Leo. I'm going to allow to see one. We've got a picture here that we want to show you. I don't know what year this was, but the gentleman on the right is Chris Fordham, who would have been chancellor between 1980 and 1988. And this must have been during one of my early times as dean, I'll put it that way. And obviously we recognize Gerald Ford, who was president from the time that President Nixon resigned until he was defeated in the 1976 election. But he did come to Carolina to give a speech. We think that was early middle 80s, but we're not sure. Next one. Now, I have a trivia question for you. You probably recognize this picture. But think about the undergraduate class of 1985. How many of you know which undergraduate major had the highest starting salary that year? CJ, what was it? Geography. Geography, because Michael Jordan was a geographer. Now, the next picture may not have been inspired by Michael Jordan, but the class of 1980 did not experience Michael Jordan. But this picture was taken in 1990 at Wrightsville Beach with a group of predominantly 1980 MBAs who by that time were in their 10th year in a row at least gathering at Wrightsville Beach. And I'll bet somebody from the class of 1980 can identify, they don't seem to be wearing numbers. George, you want to do it?
Bennett needs to help with one, but a certain interim dean, former dean, assistant dean, top left. He was a baller, and he had the sharpest elbows in the whole crowd. There's Jimmy Weeks, class of 80, John Day, class of 80, Duffy Hickey, class of 80, Wayne Gibbs, class of 80, Mike Kern, friend of Bob Jones, Pete Lofton, friend of Bennett Love, that's me, Al Spears, friend of Bob, that's Bennett Love, front left, Jim Bailey, Bob Jones, who's supposed to do Doug Doddridge, Stuart Phoenix, Tom Scott, all class of 80.
So everybody who's in that picture, just stand up for a minute. Still tear up? I have it on good authority that at that time and now, nobody in that picture except for John Day had more than a 7-inch vertical leap. Let's go to the class of 1995. Is Pete Canalicchio here?
I'm here, but I'm actually class of 1990.
Oh, I've got you in the wrong slot. Would you like to comment anyway? I'm sorry.
Don't worry.
My information must, I got it wrong.
I'm the leader work classmate, Joseph. Let me chat for a second. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. My recollections were back to class of 1990, but let me just share a little bit of what made that special to me. And I would say coming out of U.S. Navy, I was a Navy pilot and had gone to school at the Naval Academy. I thought I had gotten the most grueling kind of education you could possibly get until I showed up here on the campus of Chapel Hill to experience with a bunch of about 200 classmates what it was to be in a grueling curriculum. And I think everything that was mentioned earlier this morning about how that brought the classes together and how the curriculum, how the faculty created a curriculum that was about leadership and teamwork versus competition was tremendously experienced by myself and my classmates. And I know the study groups that we had and we were given were, if they were not divinely done, they were done in such a way that I felt like I learned more from my classmates sometimes than I did from my professors. And it was a tremendous benefit to each of us to be able to have those classmates and sometimes even give over like control of a particular project that you may never even have looked at to some folks who are going to help you get a grade in that class. And thankfully for me, I had tremendous teammates and groupmates that would help ensure that we did a good job. So all those things to me made this exceptionally special. I felt like I came out of here and still work every day with the attitude of how do we win collectively, what's win-win look like, and Leo's words earlier, I'd love to continue to pay it forward. Fortunately for me, I'm now representing the Atlanta chapter down in Atlanta as the interim, I guess the ongoing president, and would welcome the opportunity for any of you in this room who would love to come down and talk to us about your careers and why Carolina was so special. It would be an honor for us to have host you there. So I'll give the floor back to you, but thanks so much.
Thank you. Whichever class you were in, we're glad you're here. Something else very important was going on in the middle 90s, but its predecessors were back in the middle 80s. By roughly 1985, we had outgrown the combination of Carroll and New Carroll Hall. And we had begun the begging process of getting both a site and the opportunity to build a new building. Many of you know, I think, that we didn't actually occupy what is now the McCall building until October of 1997. In between there, two really important people served as dean of the school, Paul Rizzo and Paul Fulton, two people to whom I refer as Dean Paul I and Dean Paul II. Dean Paul II is here, and I've invited him to make a few comments about putting together the deal that led to the McCall building.
Thank you, Jack. And, I'd first like to add the comments, folks made earlier about Jack. Jack's contribution on this campus has been as broad as it could be. He's been dean, I don't know how many times. He's been chief financial officer.
Still trying to get it right.
You got it right. I think he's done about everything but coach the basketball team, and he might could have done that. But, Jack, I'm one of those that's a lot more attached to this building than I am to the McCall building. For some reason, as we built the McCall building, I sort of felt like I really never occupied that office there. I was in this corner office up here, and I don't know, somehow that was sort of important to me. But the McCall building was underway when I came, and the state had given us, I remember 17 million, Jack says it was 13 or 14, and somewhere in that range. And the total cost of the project was some $45 million, and including the parking deck. And we were successful in raising that money, and that was prior to even the naming of it. And as it was being built, I remember that I'd done a fair amount of looking at office arrangements in my corporate days, and I was very interested in an open approach to the offices. And as I suggested that to the faculty, it fell on very deaf ears. But we finally were able to convince them. I think you'll find a small strip of glass over about that wide. And it was a couple of years later that I learned why that was true. I think all of you probably remember Professor Bill Fisher, who was here. And during that time, Bill lost his bicycle for 3 or 4 weeks, and he found it in his damn office. I think that's a true story. So it was very obvious that why the transparency aspect of that office was not something. You know, if I can comment on a few of the other milestones while I was here. Bob Hedden asked me when I was out in the hallway how long I was dean, and my usual answer in a jestful way is like it's 100 years. And it wasn't quite that long, and one of the reasons why was at that time my tuition ranged at about, I forget, $2,000 or $3,000 for in-state, maybe 4 or 5 for out-of-state, and you know, to have a really top-flight business school, you just were not going to accomplish it with that sort of level. So at the time, the general administration at the bottom of the hill was very anti-tuition increase. Dick Spangler led that. And we had an entree in the legislature and ended up at Paul Rizzo and myself and Bill McCory and Bob Eubanks had enough entree in the legislature to approach them about giving latitude for a campus-based or school-based tuition. And I remember going to Michael Hooker and telling about it, and Michael was great. He said, well, have at it, but when the stuff hits the fan, don't expect me to be there. So we did. The four of us went through the work of Mark Bass and I were able to get through the provision for campus-based or school-based tuition. Now, some of you in here may regret that when you think of what you pay as compared. But I would say it's made a great difference in this school. And some of the other things that came about, the fourth section, and I remember the really political battle you had to, all we wanted to do was keep the tuition from the revenue generated by it, but it made from the standpoint of placement, a lot more companies came in here, people like Bain and McKinsey who had never before. It made a huge difference. And then I remember the start of the Rizzo Center when we were originally going to put it on the back behind the present business school on that knoll. And I was in New York seeing Dick Ginbrett, and I was just telling him about our plans, and he said, have you looked at the DuBose property? And I said, no. And I landed in Raleigh, it was still light, and I rode out there, and it was spectacular. And it belonged to the university at the time. And so we just had to convince them to let the business school make plans and use that. And then David Ravenscraft had the job of selling the faculty who at the time weren't too keen about driving out there. But I look at that facility today, and it's spectacular. It really is. And Charlie Loudermilk and Jim McLean gave their early money to it. So it's, I think, really one of the milestones. And Raleigh Tillman's back there. Where is Raleigh? Raleigh initiated and started the Entrepreneur Center at that time, which I think is a big part of what they ever do. So it was a meaningful period in the school with all what was done. I remember when I first was coming here, I got to know the dean at Northwestern, Dean Jacobs, and I went out to see him. I was in Chicago with Sir Lee, and he asked me, he said, what are you going to do? Do you plan to teach? And I said, no, I didn't plan on teaching. And he said, well, you got to. It's the only way to connect with the students and what have you. I said, what the hell am I going to teach? He said, you teach leadership, you can do it. Well, I went from there to Harvard to see a guy named John Cotter, who had written every leadership book. So I played the idea on him. He looked at me, I said, dumbest idea I ever heard of. He said, first, you won't be very good at it. He said, it will absorb your time, and said, you've just got a lot more value in different areas that you contribute to. And he was so right. And my concentration here was generally externally, and I think we were able to do a lot from the infrastructure of the school and the financial and what have you. And I used to say in academics, I hope we're level at best, but it was as I look back on it, it was a really cherished 4 years of mine. It wasn't like the 100. It may have seemed it at the time, but it was a period of time that I wouldn't give up for anything. Jack, nice to be with you.
Thank you. Another quick comment on the project that became what is now called and the business day. It was Mike Miles who had the idea in the early 90s to do a deal with the Educational Foundation in which they would put up part of the funding for the parking deck. We would put up part of it. And And there was a deal that they had access to it on weekends and evenings for football and basketball games, and we had access to it during the day. But that was an absolutely crucial thing. We may not have realized at the time how critical that was. There really wasn't a place to build another business school building here unless we'd gone out here in the parking lot. And if we had done that, that would have converted parking into a building. And my point is, a building here on the main campus, however geographically convenient that would have been, would not have had parking. And if we had not had parking available at least to selected MBA students who lived far enough away, that would have been a competitive disadvantage for them. So it was a really significant part of that deal. Mike, well done. We're going to move on quickly here. Is Steve Wolf here? Steve, I invited you if you could make a couple comments about the class of 2000, if you will.
Thanks for the invitation, Jack. You failed to tell me that I was going to have to follow Dean Fulton. That's a tough act to follow.
I won't say that was accidental.
But it's a nice transition. When I saw in the agenda that this event was going to be held in Carroll Hall, I thought to myself, I've actually never been in Carroll Hall until this morning. So the class of 2000, we were the first class to not just move into the McCall building, but inherit the McCall building fully. The class of 98, the class of 99 started and took classes here in this building and then transitioned when the McCall building opened. But our experience starts and really was wholly involved in the McCall building, from campus tours and interviews through our class. We were the first one. So I remember searching for a business school and interviewing at a number of other schools, and the McCall building really just stood out as a complete jewel at the time. Just every desk with a power cord and an Ethernet cord to plug in your laptop. You know, that's how we were doing business and taking notes then. Everybody's, plowing away on their laptop in course and taking notes. The projectors and screens and ever-present PowerPoint slides, every class, screen came down, professors projecting PowerPoint. That's just how we learned. The McCall building really stood out at the time as a jewel, and it's incredible to see how it's evolved since in the last 17 years since we walked onto campus. It continues to just be incredibly amazing. When I was thinking about our class experience in the class of 2000, one thing that popped right to mind for me was just the incredible quality of the faculty. And I know everybody here has incredible memories of professors that stood out. For me, it was David Ravenscraft M&A class and Jay Clockmaker's pricing class. Several others, Al Seeger's e-commerce and technology class. We were the class that really inherited the internet boom, and a number of classmates ended up going not only to traditional financial and marketing companies, but to Dell and Amazon and IBM and HP and Red Hat and others, and I think a lot of that had to do with Al and the e-commerce department. For me, it was Valerie Zeifamel's marketing class on customer service. It really opened my eyes up to, aside from balance sheets and business plans and everything else core to business, the power of the customer, and that really stood out for me. Businesses need to pay attention to acquiring, and not just acquiring, but catering to their customers, customer needs, retaining them, developing loyalty, financially and for their reputation and elsewhere. And ever since, it really just struck a chord with me. I'm a marketing consultant and a market researcher, and much of what I do is customer insights, customer needs and trends, and that interest for me was really forged in that class. The other thing I think about most during our class's experience here on campus is the MBA program here was a lot of hard work. It was tough. And we had friends and colleagues at the time who went off to other schools, whose names I may not mention, and the hard part about those schools was getting in. And then rumor had it, once you were in, the school was called a networking school. You go through courses, but it's not especially hard, and it's really all about relationships. Carolina was tough. All the courses, cases, tests, combined with career studies. I think along with Dartmouth had at the time a reputation for being one of the 2 toughest academically of the top 20, 25 programs. And that leads to what I call, and I know a lot of other people refer to as the hidden MBA. What we got out of the program was not just everything we learned in class, but especially going through all those classes together, case studies, in teams, study groups. When you combine career search, the clubs, the resume prep and case prep, it was time consuming. I have a family with young kids. I have a hard job. We're all really busy people. I don't know if I've ever, though, been as busy in my life as the 2 years here in Chapel Hill. I'm getting nods from my classmates. It was a tough 2 years. It's drinking from a fire hose. So that taught us things like time management, prioritizing your day, comfort with uncertainty, all of these kind of hidden skills that helped us, I think, in the future of our careers, along with working in teams. And what that ended up doing was we were all in it together and working really, really hard and helped forge really, really strong relationships and friendships, because we're going to sink or swim together in this just cauldron of learning and very aggressive academics. And I look across my classmates' faces and many others who are here today, and that definitely holds true. So, thank you, Steve.
We had a fairly light yield of people from the class of 05 and 10. Anybody here from those classes that would like to comment?
Class 05. Because following my fellow from class psychology said, it was really the hidden MBA that was something special for me. So time management and all this additional learning that we had, that was not in the core curriculum agenda per se, but it was really, really special and really, really helpful for me. And another thing that struck me as a probably international student was the quality of the faculty. Even though the course was really hard, my feeling was there was no way, if you wanted, you would learn. It's just, the faculty was always available, reachable. You could explain things like 5 different ways for you to learn, and it was really, really different from what I had, for example, in my engineering undergrad. And it was just study, do your work, and use the help you had, and you were able to reach it. It's really, really a great experience.
Thank you. We titled this session Then and Now. So I'd like to move now to a brief segment on the MBA program now. And one really important part of that, now that you've heard from Cal Atwood about what we tried to do in 1975 to begin to be more systematic, more organized, more intentional about things like admissions, recruiting, marketing, and placement. Sherry Wallace is here, who is not only a graduate of the MBA program, but is the director of MBA admissions, and I invited her to give you a brief summary of just how we approach those things now. Sherry?
Okay, can everybody see me over here? Well, I have to say that this has been an incredible morning for me. And as a member of the class, MBA class of 87, it's so cool to be in the room with 7 of the faculty from my first year in 1985. I've seen my marketing professor, my stats professor, my D, my ops professor, Mike Miles, my IM professor. I saw Morgan Jones, and also Raleigh Tillman, who taught me new ventures. So what a wonderful history is happening in this room for me. And I can't wait to get on Facebook and tell all of my friends from the class of 87 how many of you I saw. I've also been very fortunate to, after about 12 years, post-MBA, I got the opportunity to come back here and work. So I've been the director of admissions for the full-time MBA program since 1998. So about going on our 17th year. And the only way I was able to do this is from a colleague who's in the room with me. Allison Jesse was hired at the same time. I had no admissions experience, but I had a lot of marketing and brand management experience. And so together, she taught me admissions, I taught her a lot about business and MBA, and we've all learned a lot about, and I knew a lot about UNC and Kenan Flagler. And it's been a wonderful transition because I've gotten to relive my Kenan Flagler experience every day at work. What's what's happening now, many of you have already summed up what we represent and what we see reflected back. We travel all over the world and all over the US looking for the next Kenan Flagler classes. And I'm sure that my colleagues in the other degree programs as well have the same challenges and the same opportunities that we do. For the MBA program, a couple of highlights. I think last year, we had the first year where the number of applications to the full-time MBA program from outside the US exceeded the number of applications inside the US. That's how global our program has become and how big our reputation has now extended outside of the US. And that's happened, I think, when I came to work here in '98. Foreign national applications were maybe 30% of the applicant pool, and last year it took over as 51%. And I think for the class that's going to enroll in the fall, applications from outside the US were probably going to be about, not quite 55%, but pretty close. So there, luckily, in the last 2 years, applications from all demographic segments have improved. We do continue to struggle getting the representation, the total diversity we'd like to have in our class. Women are underrepresented, a lot of underrepresented minorities, still a struggle because we've set the bar so high now that we're going after the best of every. And we are competing with any top school you can imagine for some of that underrepresented talent. So the numbers don't end up as large as we'd like them to be, but I guarantee you the people that are there are the kinds of people we want. We just need more of them. Some of the things that I'm excited about, the class now, our target is about 280 students. I think that's twice the size of my graduating class of 1987. We have just finished making enrollment, actually admission decisions. After the first 3 rounds, of which there were 4, we had hit the targeted class size. And on Monday, we're making the last rounds of offers that should take us over the top so that we'll have a little bit of room when people adjust themselves over the summer. So we're very excited about the class. We survey the students that we admit, those who come, as well as those who do crazy things like go to other schools. And what we're always very excited about, and this has been the case, I think, every year, the #1 reason that the people who choose to enroll tell us they enroll is the community, the atmosphere, the culture of the school, followed by reputation and rankings. And interesting, the #1 reason for the people who turn us down is the school that they're going to is for their reputation and ranking. So what it tells us is that not only do we get great students who aspire to belong to an elite community, they care about that culture and where they are. It's not just, I want my forehead stamped with X brand. And so the thing that we work really hard in our admissions office is getting the kind of people that make us look good, but the kind of people that continue this community. None of us wants to mess up this community on our watch. So I just want to tell you, and the other thing that we hear a lot from the students, that the reason that they're attracted to us, in addition to that community, is the quality of the teaching. And we see that time and time again in all of the current student surveys. The #1 rank on the students' #1 item every year, every semester actually, since the survey's done twice, is always the accessibility of the faculty. And that has continued in the almost 17 years that I've been working there as well. So I think that the school is in very good shape. I want to continue to ask all of you, faculty, staff, alumni, friends, keep pushing those great people toward us. We are enjoying turning down a whole lot of people right now, but we're also admitting some great people as well. Thank you.
Alice and Jesse, one of Sherry's colleagues, is here. I can't imagine 2 better people standing, so to speak, at the front door of our MBA program. attracting people to apply and then dealing with them through all of the complexities of there being applicants coming here to visit for interviews. We interview, I think, everybody that we admit, at least, and dealing with the disappointments of having to say no to a lot of those people. And you need to find a way to give comfortable but honest feedback to the people. Please work with them as you can. Moving on to some other things quickly, because I'm watching the clock and I see the time is passing. You've already heard in the comments indications that the curriculum has really evolved, has moved. You've heard references to things like globalization, entrepreneurship, sustainability, technology in the business world, social media, and more. I just want to assure those of you who were here in the earlier days that the curriculum is now, so to speak, a thoroughly modern curriculum with extremely good faculty delivering the classroom experience. Over the years, we formed support groups for the school and the MBA program that many of you know about and on which many of you are participating. We have a board of visitors, we have an alumni council, we have an international advisory board. Those connections to our people in the business workplace are very vital to us. I thank those of you who are a part of those activities. I want to transition now to a couple of comments. Several of you have talked about technology. Steve, you made a comment about what you observed in the classroom technology. I'll tell you a story about that. When Mike Miles left the school to seek his fortune in the private sector, I became chair of the building committee. And we were debating the question of what technology to put in the classrooms. There was a point where we thought, you know, the thing to do is to take one classroom on each level of the McCall building and wire it as you described, you know, a power connection and a network connection. Thank God we had the good sense not to limit it to one classroom. Had we done that, it would have been a debacle. But when the McCall building opened, every classroom was wired as you described it. What is now Cafe McCall is similarly wired. Of course, in the days of Wi-Fi, we don't need the network connection, but the power connections are important. But some of you were here in the MBA program before the days of Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Crystal Ball, etc. Before Word, there were typewriters and people who typed papers. Before PowerPoint, there were transparencies and class handouts. Before copiers, there were mimeograph machines. Some of us remember those. Before Excel, there were calculating machines and then full-function calculators. More on that in a minute. Before Crystal Ball on your laptop, there were punched cards and time-shared computers. Jim Fain referred to a bit of that. Before search engines, we actually went to libraries to get information. So let me show you a video, not a video, but some slides of some early MBAs working at work. This is obviously work on a term paper. This is a text message. That's a teen preparing a presentation for class. That's an early calculating machine. And that in the top picture is what the computer across the way in the basement of Phillips Hall might have looked like in the 1970s when you went over there to punch a deck of cards, and now all of that is available on laptop and on tablets, etc. Now, this is the MBA class of 2014, and it's kind of hard to tell it, but first, I mean, obviously you can tell that it's about 4x what the class of 1965 was. And what Shirley says, we still, sir?
It's unfortunate what we've got today. I can take the thing from 65. I graduated and had an engineering degree from UNC State in Cuban Missile Crisis that we got back. came back over here from the MBA. And if you had an engineering degree and an MBA, you could not get a job. There were no jobs in North Carolina. I went to work at IBM in New York before they opened up down here. Every engineer, MBA, you type, and a lot of MBAs are doing, you had to leave the state of North Carolina to get and visit. And things are just so much better than we should try. It's just a different completely. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. Sherry mentioned quickly that we still work hard to get the representation of women up to where we would like it to be in the program, and to get a suitable number of minority applicants. You can't really tell it in this picture. We are doing better, but we can do better. About a month ago, I sent out an email with Matt Marvin's help, and I asked a number of you to send back recollections of your time in the program. So in the spirit of David Letterman, here are the top 10 important memories. Bear with me here. Cell phones didn't exist, so professors didn't have to include ground rules about cell phones, tablets, and PCs in their initial class meeting. A handheld Texas Instruments calculator cost $84.95 on the first day of class in 1973. The price dropped to $69.95 by the second week of class. It was one of the first live situation case studies in how a second-year student entrepreneur would fleece the inexperienced newbies under the Gordon Gekko mantra of greed is good. Multitasking was a term that only applied to completing the crossword puzzle in the Daily Tar Heel during the first class lecture each morning. The pre-assigned study groups, remember those, 4 people each, had a half-life of about 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, they were down to 2 people showing up, and after a month, most of them had quit meeting altogether. That may have been then. I do think that's different now. I believe the people in the study groups are much more dependent on what happens in those study groups. The big debate before our first accounting test was whether or not we would be allowed to use calculators for the test. I remember Dr. Langendorfer teaching us how to cast out nines as a way of checking our totals for manual calculations. The determination was no calculators. Not sure if we ever got to use them on tests or exams in the first year. The computer was an enormous machine in the building next door. We had to type punch cards. You've heard about that. Best beer and pinball was at Clarence's. Great place to unwind and keep up with great ideas. Pac-Man was the newest game. Think Macaulay's opened late fall '73. Too crowded, mostly undergraduates. Clarence and Mrs. Clarence were great. Our class alone probably provided Clarence and Mrs. Clarence with the means to retire early. And finally, international/global was less of a focus, but Dr. Behrman told us it would be important. I conclude with that last comment for 2 reasons. One is the understatement of the day, and 2, it came from the person who became Secretary of Commerce of the state of North Carolina. All right, let me move on to some brief concluding remarks. In 1965, the school had 3 programs: the undergraduate program, the MBA program, and the PhD program. Today, we have 9 programs, including 6 MBA programs, as you saw in Raleigh's video. The full-time MBA program absolutely remains our flagship, with a total enrollment of about 550. However, the combined enrollment in our, what I'll call face-to-face, or our MBA programs that have a residential component, is I think approximately 750. And I learned from Doug Shackelford last night that enrollment in MBA at UNC, our online program, is now above 1,000, and is one of the really strong entries in that market. With an online MAC program about to start, we operate from 4 locations, not 1, not counting the multiple locations that we use for the 1 MBA program and the Tsinghua dual degree program. Whether you just graduated or recently, and haven't quite left Kenan Flagler in your mind, or whether you graduated as much as 50 years ago, I hope this session gives you a sense of some shared history of our MBA program, or I should now say programs. Perhaps some people, probably not those of you who have chosen to return for this weekend, think of your MBA experience as simply a 2-year time slice. But I know from a lot of conversations with you, from friendships, from interactions over many years, perhaps all of you here think of your time in the MBA program as the beginning of a journey and a set of relationships that continue to be important to you. Though it's true that those of you here graduated into careers and did not interact across classes within the program, I hope this session gives you a somewhat enhanced sense of shared experience, history, connection, and culture. Many of you had to deal with integrated management papers from Nick Levin. Many of you had to endure a meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning. You probably shouldn't turn an engineer loose to think about metaphors, but I spent a little time trying to think of one. And here it is. If you think of the MBA program as a flowing river, each of us, so to speak, floated our personal boat in that river at our own time. The river may have looked different to each of us, but that river connects us all. We all share our association with this program and school, and I thank you for what you've done to create and sustain the program. Several years ago, James Measer became the university's chancellor, and he arrived here coming from another institution, having had no previous connection to Carolina. And in his introductory comments, public comments with people, he used 2 lines that I thought were very appropriate, and I think they fit here. We are warmed by fires we did not build. We drink from wells we did not dig. I thought Leo Horry made a point about that very well. A lot has changed over the years. Many of you benefited from Raleigh Tillman, John Pringle, DeWitt Dearborn, Bob Hedden, C.L. Kendall, Dick Levin, Jack Behrman, Mike Miles in the classroom. Today's students have the stars of today: Bob Connolly, Allison Friedel, Mustafa Gultikan, David Ravenscraft, David Hoffman, Jennifer Conrad, Anil Shivdasani, Valerie Zeighamel, Al Seegers, Sridhar Balasubramaniam, Wendell Gillen, David Hartzell. That's a star lineup. The commitment to your classroom experience continues for the students today. So I conclude by thanking Sandra Hedrick and Matt Marvin, other people on the staff for help in putting this session together. I thank you for returning to participate in this session and revisit your program. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you for coming. Have a great day.